Would like to call the Joint Village Board and Finance and Personnel meeting to order for Tuesday, November 9th. Roll call, please.
Village Board President Mary Kradowski,
Here.
Trustee Allison Williams,
Here.
Trustee Gary Paul, excused, Trustee Chris Serbel,
Here.
Trustee Jay Krieger,
Here.
Trustee Steve Kabaki,
Here.
and Trustee Tracy Flukie.
Here.
Okay, Finance and Personnel, Chris Serbel,
Here.
Allison Williams,
Here.
Tracy Flukie,
Here.
Allison Brunette, excused, Tom Selk.
Here.
Okay, please stand for the pledge. And please remember the men and women throughout the world in uniform, especially as we get so close to Veterans Day. I have no changes to the agenda. I need a motion to approve, please.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve the agenda as presented. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Number 5, action items, 5A, 2022 Village Budget Review. Now, before we start, I would like to thank Joel, Greg, all the department heads, all the department personnel for this budget. They worked really, really hard. It was a challenging budget. We did raise the levy because we added some personnel. We have some personnel needs. Everybody knows that. We run pretty lean and mean here in the village. So we did raise the levy. However, the actual mill rate is the lowest since 2012, which is good news. 64 cents per thousand is for the referendum projects that we approved over the last couple of years, which, you know, otherwise our levy or our mill rate is $4.78. Yep, $4.78. So I would like to thank the staff. Everybody understood if there were any cuts, why we had to do them. So thanks to everybody who did that. And then I also have one more announcement. We will have no large rubbish pickup this month because we have the leaf trucks out. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows that in November next week, there is no large rubbish pickup.
Of course, the same week I'm moving too. So. Intentional.
That was, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We did that on purpose.
Yeah, I figured that.
No. So anyway, so with that, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Joel and Greg.
Okay, thank you, Madam President, members of the board and committee. So thank you for meeting with us tonight to basically conduct our sole planned budget work session for the 2022 budget. Real quickly, what I'd like to do is kind of cover a few items of interest at a very high level, and then certainly there'll be more than adequate time to go into budget discussion, deliberation, answer any questions that you have. I also understand there's an interest to just call the question right away and approve the budget as is. So we're welcome to entertain that as well. Really quickly, if you recall a few months back, we discussed kind of some key budget priorities with the board. I'm happy to announce that I think we've done a good job in presenting to you a balanced budget that meets those priorities and those key conditions that were discussed at that prior meeting. A couple key things that we want to point out that we were working through is obviously we knew that there was going to be a partial market adjustment or reevaluation for residential class properties in the village of Ashwaubenon. And that is different from the commercial class. So commercial class properties were not adjusted to the same degree that residential class was, primarily because of the market conditions. As a result of that market change, what that ultimately did, anecdotally, is kind of shift that tax burden, if you will, more so towards residential class properties than commercial class. And our efforts here were to recognize that in all likelihood, because of the increase in our equalized value, that our tax rate will decrease inevitably because of that change. However, there will be a shift of burden on that tax levy to the residential class. And so our goal was to try to minimize and balance that effort while still trying to meet the service demands of the community. And we'll talk through that in a little bit more detail, but by and large, those were our main focus points, were reduce the tax rate, maintain an adequate levy to support our continued and growing operational needs, as well as recognizing the amount of change in equalized value to the community as a result of our current market condition. So real quickly, as I kind of go through the presentation, just a couple quick key points. So Jay, this is your first budget go around at the municipal level. So for that purpose, I kind of give a quick overview of budgeting 101 from municipal side. Steve and Tracy are well versed in this, but if you were a new trustee, this would be of value to you as well. Ultimately, the budget has three primary responsibilities. One, to meet our statutory requirements. In Wisconsin, municipal governments are required by law to have a balanced budget. As part of that budget, there are provisions of services that are also required under statutes, whether it's fire and rescue, EMS, elections, snow and ice control, stormwater management. There are mandates that the state government puts upon local units of government. And so the budget process is really devised to establish those programs of services. Second, it's to provide transparency. How are we spending our taxpayers' money? And what are the priorities towards that spend? And then third, it is to help facilitate decision-making. Hence the reason why we're here today is to review the proposed budget, deliberate, and debate upon the program of services that we are looking to provide. Ultimately, our budget is broken down under what is called a budget fund structure. There are governmental funds, enterprise funds, and internal service funds. The governmental funds are the ones that we will be primarily focused on today because they, by and large, affect your property taxes. These are the funds that are being supported through property taxes. Enterprise funds typically are funded through some type of user fee or charge, right? Your water bill, your sewer bill, so on and so forth. Internal service funds will service both governmental funds as well as your enterprise funds. So in turn, they do have an indirect effect in your property taxes because there is generally a chargeback from those governmental or enterprise funds to support the internal service fund. So as an example, our medical and dental insurance is an internal service fund. There is an expense to provide benefits to our employees. Those expenses are charged back to the general fund, and in turn, that is supported through property tax levy. Same thing with the equipment replacement fund. There are chargebacks for hourly vehicle operation and maintenance to the variety of different funds. And in turn, indirectly, those are supported through property taxes or user fees. When we develop the budget, of course, we take into account the strategic plan that we worked on over the course of this past year. We looked at our mission statement. We understood our vision statement as we began this process, and then also focused on the strategic directives from a high level, all encompassing the core values of the organization. As Mary had alluded to, we are looking at a property tax levy increase from the prior fiscal period. And that difference is just over $328,000 or 2.58%. By and large, 78% of that is property tax levy that is to support the general fund and our operations. And then the second largest component of that tax levy is the referendum projects that are being supported by the property tax. I should also note that the debt service fund tax levy is decreasing this year. So by and large, we are spending less tax dollars towards the repayment of existing debt. So that's good. That means our debt service is decreasing. As Mary also had alluded to, our operating tax rate has decreased to the lowest level since 2012. So obviously, because of the increase in value to the community and our efficient operations, we were able to decrease that tax rate to that level. As she also mentioned, roughly 64% or 64 cents of our combined tax rate is made up of those referendum projects. So as you can see from this chart, we've kind of done a good job over the years of balancing our overall tax rate to support the service needs of the community. And the proposed budget is supported by a tax rate of $5.42 per $1,000 of assessed value. Now, just to give you kind of a comparable of impact here on the overall proposed budget, you can see here on this particular table, the total equalized value of the village increased by an equal 7% over last year. That's a very sizable increase year over year. And that's directly related to the market conditions that we're seeing. Residential home values have increased exponentially because of market demand. And so that number has increased. Our total tax levy, as described before, is increasing at a proposed 2.58%. And because of that change of equalized value and the net change of total tax levy, our tax rate is decreasing by an amount of 6.48%. Now, when you look at this particular table, you'll say, well, 2.5% from 7% isn't 6.5%. And that's directly related to the fact that when we take our tax levy, we have to divide that by our aggregate assessed value. So the equalized value is the value established by the state. The assessed value is the value of all real property in the community and then divided based on their market value by the assessor. Ideally, you want to get your ratio as close to 1. Your assessed value, your combined aggregate assessed value, the intent is to get as closest to the equalized value as you possibly can. We attempted to do that this past year, but because of market conditions and the amount of percentage change, we weren't able to hit that exact one-to-one ratio. So our aggregate assessed value ratio is indicated here in the footnotes at 0.94. And that's where that deviation between the amount of decrease in the tax rate to the difference between the equalized value and the percent increase in the overall levy. So by and large, individual homeowners may see an impact to their overall tax bill from a village tax perspective because of that deviation. And these are the primary numbers that we were concerned about in packaging the combined budget, because we knew that there would be an impact to the typical homeowner in our community. When you look at rate alone, it appears that we've done a substantially excellent job in preparing our budget. And that's primarily because the increase in equalized value inevitably decreases the overall rate in the community. And so if we were to look at a home or a property valued at $100,000 just for incremental purposes, you would see that based on last year's rate in comparison to the proposed budget rate for this year, there would be a decrease in the tax burden of $37.53. But we know that there has been a shift, obviously, in the burden in taxes for residential class property. So on the bottom of this table, as indicated, in the 2021 budget, the median home value in Ashwaubenon was just over $159,000. And at a tax rate of roughly $5.79, the village taxes on that home would be $922.26. With the change in valuation, the change in the assessment ratio, and the increase in our overall levy, the median home value in the community as of 2021, so this current year, is $187,300. And because of that change, that median home value owner would see a property tax for the village of $1,014.75. That is an increase for the median home value of $92.46. So we are increasing the levy. The rate is decreasing. The typical homeowner in the community will see a village tax increase of roughly $92.46. And the point of telling you that is just to be wholly transparent, that because we are increasing the levy, there is an increase to the tax burden to the community as a result of that. When we look at the overall general fund budget from a revenue side, 61% of our operating budget is supported by property taxes. And that is pretty typical for communities in the state of Wisconsin. That is not something that is atypical. The other number that I do want to point out to the group is the second second highest contribution to our revenues, and that are our intergovernmental revenues. And in next year's budget, we have just over $2.5 million of intergovernmental revenues. By and large, those are made up by state shared revenues, general transportation aids, and the like. And even though we've seen an increase in cost year over year to provide the services we provide, if you look at that green section in the bar graph, you'll see that relatively speaking, our intergovernmental revenues have remained relatively flat. So in essence, that's more or less a hit on the village, if you will, or local municipal governments from the state because they are not keeping up with the rate of inflation or the cost to provide the services. And so it becomes increasingly more difficult for us to provide those services without having an impact to the overall property tax. The next chart here is also found in your budget book, and this is related to our general fund expenditures. And the key thing here I want to point out is from an operating standpoint, public safety takes up 51% of our overall operating budget. It is by far the largest single operation in our agency, and by and large, it is our largest expenditure from an operation side. Second to that would be public works. And it's a pretty sizable difference between the two. Now, when you start looking at total dollars spent, however, obviously there are components to public works that aren't part of operations, and that's capital repair and replacement. You know, the cost to repair or replace a road or pieces of equipment are not necessarily always factored into your operating budget. Those are found more in your capital replacement budget, or certainly within the enterprise funds as it relates to utility infrastructure that is planned to be replaced. The next slide kind of takes those operating expenditures and breaks them into categories. And the purpose of putting this together in the book and presenting it to you is to highlight the fact that by and large, our single largest investment or asset to our organization are the people that are employed by the village. So 55% of our total operating spend is directly tied to wages. And so those are obviously the employees that work on behalf of the village. Supplies makes up only 7% of our overall operating budget. And another key point here that I want to make with this particular table is that if we want to begin the process of maybe looking at the budget and tightening the screws, if you will, and we start focusing on only supply expenditures, it's going to take a lot of supply expenditures to reduce in order to kind of make the headway you want to make an impact to your overall tax levy. At that point, you are really focused on headcount, right? And the efficiency and the delivery of services. And so again, that's my point is we don't want to necessarily get into the conversation about how many pens are you going to buy? How many reams of paper are you going to purchase? How many oil filters are you going to need? By and large, those are going to have de minimis impact into the budget. You're really focused on level of service and the individuals that are here to support that level of service. Couple quick points that we'll make as part of this budget. So this particular slide is intended to give you the big items. Now, there are many little items that are certainly incorporated into the budget, and they are detailed in the budget book. But these are items that were included as part of the budget that was submitted by department heads that withstood the review and the scrutiny, I guess, of Mary, Greg, and I, and our discussions internally with each department. So from a general government side, within the finance and IT department, there is an additional position for a multimedia communication specialist. The combined cost to provide that additional position is listed here and in your budget at $62,585. Again, that was submitted originally as part of the initial budget, and that has been maintained. Listed here on the slide is the general wage increase. Now that's listed here under general government, but it applies to all departments. And as you recall at a previous meeting, the board agreed to target a 3% wage increase for all employees to keep up with the rate of inflation. That is included in the budget as well. Public safety, they have $44,782 to be applied towards the addition of a paid on-premise firefighter paramedic. We are still negotiating with the association to allow for that provision, so that is pending final adoption of the CBA, but there are dollars assigned to allow for that part-time paid on-premise staffing to assist and provide enhanced coverage within our community. Public Works, there's been a variety of different discussions over the past few months related to a variety of different Public Works issues. 3 of those issues directly would be the addition of the Highland Ridge subdivision and the impact that that may have on garbage and refuse collection in the near future as homes begin to be built. There's been discussions about trail and maintenance of sidewalks in the winter months. And most recently, there were, by and large, some conversations related to the impact to operations as it relates to TDS and the fiber optic installation. Because of those components, internally, we elected to incorporate the addition of a field operator in the Public Works Department to support ultimately those 3 issues. We recognize also that this year, based on the increase in equalized value and our net new construction, that it would be an appropriate time to add that operator now versus next year or the year after when maybe our financial condition isn't as well known. On the Park, Rec, and Forestry side, there was a request to reclassify the current custodian position to a park maintenance worker, and so by and large, that was a single large item, and that was also incorporated into this budget. Next were the modifications. So there were elements that were included in the budget from department heads, and they are included in your budget book, primarily on page 14 and 15. These items were essentially removed from the budget, either outright, meaning they are no longer included in any form or fashion, or they were removed from the general fund budget or our capital fund budget and are being allocated towards our ARPA program. So as you recall, the American Rescue Plan Act will provide the village up to almost $1.8 million in total. Those dollars can be used for the loss of projected revenues or current and projected revenues as a result of the pandemic. The projects that we are allocating towards the ARPA fund are those projects that we would have normally otherwise completed had the revenues been available to us. So real quickly here, these modifications include all the projects that are identified on page 14. So we have a number of capital projects that were shifted into the ARPA fund, the Special Revenue Fund for ARPA. On public safety, there were a couple additional staffing requests. One, there was a request to add an additional public safety officer, so a full-time officer into the department, primarily to be used as a directed enforcement officer or a traffic car. The next one was there was a large amount allocated towards uniform allowance, and based on current contract negotiations, we reduced that amount by a significant portion. And then there was also a request to add an additional full-time fire inspector into the public safety department. And again, just based on current staffing and some of the transition that they faced this past year with some of their part-time inspectors, we felt that it was appropriate to hold off on that hiring until we can get a better analysis of the needs of that particular program. On the public works side, much of that was related to capital outlay requests, and most of those items were moved to the ARPA fund to support those efforts. And then finally, under Parks, Rec, and Forestry, we had some cost allocated for the sesquicentennial. We took that out of general operating, and we put that into a donation fund that we could then secure donations or transfer fund balance from some of the other funds to support that effort, primarily so that it does not have a tax levy impact for next year. There's been a lot of conversation about the snow removal services, and so there was a reduction in the value of that to reflect that we wouldn't necessarily, based on the timing of when the program could begin, There's a dollar amount allocated to begin snow removal on a trial basis for trails and sidewalks at the beginning of the 2022-2023 snow season. So inevitably, if we adopt the budget now, this budget won't take effect until January 1. We'll have already been in the beginning of our snow season, and so to kind of back into that halfway through the snow season, we felt it would be difficult. So we moved those dollars to account for snow removal in November and December of 2022. And then obviously in the 2023 budget, we will need to account for those additional months as we move forward. As I mentioned, page 14 and 15 in your budget book identifies a lot of the changes and alterations that we've made. There have been a number of smaller items that you can certainly see clearly in the budget detail that have been moved around. There's a couple other things that I'll point out as you go through the budget book in detail and you look at specific line items. If you see increases or deviations under wages and benefits, that's directly related to probably one of three things. One of the positions that were proposed to be added, as described earlier, the 3% wage increase across the board, or simply an allocation of wages across all of the different funds that we support. So oftentimes, we allocate wages in public works to be in street maintenance, but because of workload, they may be working in the stormwater utility, and so their wages will be assigned to the stormwater utility. So oftentimes, you'll see some fluctuations and deviations because of those allocations. Beyond that, if there are other elements, a good example in the clerk's budget, there's a decrease of roughly $23,000 for weights and measures. We're not eliminating that program, we're just shifting it, and we moved it into the finance department where that's functionally being handled from an operations standpoint. So with that, Greg and I are here to answer whatever questions you have. Obviously, the department heads are here as well to get into the specifics of their budget, and we'd be happy to answer whatever questions you may have.
Let's start on general government.
Just a small point on page 4.
I forgot about
The graph is very nice, except we don't have a clerk treasurer anymore.
Yep, I forgot about
Oh.
that, Greg. I have that marked too.
Minor detail, but
Yeah, it says clerk treasurer elected. We don't have that anymore. Okay,
Page 6, looks like we're transferring $325,000 from fund balance into the budget again this year, is that correct?
No, that's,
Or general fund, I should say.
so the column 21 forecast is to mirror the 2021 budget. So we will not be transferring
Got it.
or absorbing any fund
Okay.
balance in this
So
budget.
there's
It's a
nothing
balance.
in 2022, okay, thank you. What is our fund balance goal to have? What percentage do we usually try to keep?
Our policy actually says 20%. We're going to maintain at 30. So we were up around 34%. And last year we talked about, and our rating agencies, a lot of that felt to drop at 4% would be fine.
We're at about 31.3 now, something like that. Okay. Well, I'm glad to see that there's none of that in the 2022 budget, because we had been drawing down on that, and it's, not a significant amount, and we still have sufficient reserves, but, as well as I do, the bond council looks at trends. So, very good, thank you.
So just as a point of reference, typically what we do is we'll go through here, any questions we have, and we would generally approve the general fund in total and not by department, simply because it provides us more flexibility. If you approve an individual department, then they're kind of stuck at that level. And then we get into the special revenue funds, the capital project funds, utility, enterprise funds, et cetera. So
I just have a general question. How, with the number of new commercial buildings going up in Ashwaubenon, especially the Titletown district, and then with Belen moving in, that all goes through a TIF district, so it really doesn't affect the normal taxpayer, is that correct?
Correct. So those valuations will come in, whatever their valuation is on a year, January 1st. You don't see the revenue for 2 years after that anyway, but that's all within the TIF districts. Correct. The base value is held within the operational levy, so if a parcel within a TIF district, once it's locked in the district, whatever the value it had at that moment, you continue to maintain the tax on that base value. So let's say it's $10 million. And if it grows to 50, the taxes on the incremental 40 stay within the district. The taxes on the original 10 stay within your operations.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody have other questions? General questions?
Should we start with revenues, maybe, as long as they're at the beginning?
Sure.
The one question I had on revenues was court penalties and costs. In 2020, we were at 177,000. We're budgeting 300,000. And I know that fluctuates depending on what's happening out on the streets and that kind of thing. Feel comfortable with that number?
Yeah, it's such a variable, really. I mean, you know that. So
Right.
it's one of those that if you, hey, let's drop it 50, and then you're just, next year's back up again, and you're down again, and then you're going to end up cutting something out of the budget that maybe you didn't need to. It's kind of one of those that over time, it kind of levels itself out. That's kind of how we look at that line.
And then the cable TV franchise fee looks like it's dropping and continuing to drop.
Yes,
That's what you're seeing out there.
yep.
Why is that dropping? Just the contract that we have with them? They're not paying as much over the years, or how does that work?
Generally, there's less users
So it's
on
based
on
on,
the cable franchise. So they're buying their internet from another provider and then streaming through a variety of different streaming avenues versus just buying cable directly.
With TDS coming in, are they going to be providing any dollars?
Yeah, he said he would, but most likely they're going to just take it from someone else. The majority of their revenues through this franchise fee would come from an alternative that we would have been getting it from AT&T, for example. Now it's coming from them. They did expect to gain some growth, but that wouldn't probably factor in until maybe 2023.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Any other questions on the revenue side?
what's the personal property aid, actually? That's not personal property taxes, correct? It's down considerably. It's on page 9.
That's a state aid, right? It's not personal property tax. It's how do I explain that one?
Yeah, so the state has been attempting over the past few years to eliminate personal property tax. And so certain elements of the personal property tax were eliminated. And as part of the legislation, the state agreed that they would provide aid payments to match the loss of revenue that the tax would have provided. And so those aid payments reflect that loss of tax revenue that we would have normally have gotten.
I always say when it comes to the personal property tax, it's great to think that you don't have to charge for personal property tax, but who's going to make up that money? And right now, the state isn't necessarily willing to give more money, so. Anyway.
Any
Okay,
other questions on revenues? If not, we can go on to expenditures. So you've got a few breakouts, expenditures by department and then by account. Those add up to the same number, obviously. And then there's, after that's on pages 11, 12, and 13. And then after that, we have, as Joel alluded to earlier, all of the modifications that were made. I think it's important to note again that even though things were cut, removed, nothing was cut, removed per se from last year's budget. So when we talked about a position that was removed, it was something that was requested to be added. So we're not losing our existing staff levels. There may be some minor modifications with some supply lines or some other things. Usually those are trends. So as you see through the budget, variances plus and minus, typically it's trying to match trend lines or rate changes, or I know staff has done a great job of, we went to a conference this year, but that was a one-time thing, so now it's dropping again, and things like that. So as a whole, operationally, things are fairly status quo.
I think I got a question for the chief. With the denial of that, in that PSO officer, I know that you had some thoughts around that coverage from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m., but now you've kind of added in a couple of part-time, so you feel that those couple of part-time people can give you then that additional coverage out in the field? Is that the thought process?
Well, I don't know if we're going to get those yet. That's still subject to the collective bargaining and whether that happens or not. I will say that the hope is with the firefighter paramedic positions, those paid on premise positions, that it will provide an opportunity to add more road staffing, but that will be dependent on where we're at for staffing of the day and of that types of things. So I don't know that those positions themselves are to enhance our services and provide for that opportunity. What that's going to look like, we don't really know for sure until we start using them and seeing how they can affect us and make us more operationally efficient. And then we can certainly see what that looks like as far as the PSO positions go in the future.
Okay, so your hope is that it might give you partial for this individual that...
Yeah, I mean, those positions themselves are really to enhance our paramedic services. The EMS paramedic services are just, they're going through the roof. They're busy, so they're really to enhance the paramedic coverage. That in turn will provide some enhanced coverage for the officers as well. So we're hoping to see a little bit of a ripple effect with that as well.
Okay, thank you.
With those positions at all, do you envision an officer not having to go on the ambulance calls as often with them there, or will that not impact that out? Will still an officer go out to any emergency call like that?
Yeah, I mean, we want to be able to provide the best services we can to the community. I think the officers are probably still going to be the first responders there because they're already out in the field. So, can we take a look at what that looks like once they're there? Absolutely. But I think they're still going to respond for the most part.
So how do you envision with adding the 2 part-time positions, and I know Jay just asked this, but if you don't think that's going to impact that much, are there other things you're looking at to try to allow for more traffic enforcement through the department? Other ways to do it, I guess.
Yeah, I think there are ways to do it somewhat. I don't know how effective it's going to be, but really it's going to be how we as an agency allocate the time to devote to that type of enforcement. So what I mean by that is, are there opportunities for us to spend more time in these areas? And that's really, like I said, and we talked previously, is going to depend on the call volume. But I think that there are opportunities for us to be more proactive. I certainly think that's the case. And that's kind of an operational internal procedure that we need to work on as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions on the expenditures?
Just a question on the assessment, the reduction from 130 to 62, that reflects that partial assessment that was done, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have some additional questions, but the bottom line is I just want to say that you guys did a great job with this budget. It's really quite straightforward. You've allocated dollars to the ARPA funds that are going to have a long-term positive impact, significant projects. So I think you really balanced very well with the budget. I don't have a tremendous amount of questions and that kind of thing. They're really quite more informational than, I'll use the term questioning, so that I just have information in my back pocket. But one thing I've got to say is your budget and what you've done here, you know, nobody likes the levy to go up, nobody likes for additional taxes, but bottom line is you've got to be ahead of the ball game relative to planning and preparing, and I think you did a great job in putting this budget together. I've got some more questions, but nothing major, but I just wanted to make that statement. I'm very impressed.
Thank you.
You guys, that includes staff. You did a great
All
job.
staff, right.
I'd also like to compliment Greg on just this overall presentation of this budget. I've been involved in a number of different budgets, and this is the clearest and the most concise budget document I have ever seen. Really helps understanding. I think the people at Ashwaubenon are very lucky to be able to have this kind of detail on a budget. So a lot of compliments for you, Greg, on just this overall process, and also to all the departments, all the efforts that they put into it. Obviously, they put a lot of inputs into it and everything, but it's a great document, and I think the budget is very sound.
Thank you, Jay. And I would echo that to the staff. I say this every year, but it becomes very easy to work with the staff. It's a good group that works well together, that sees the bigger picture. Very aggressive in their wishes and desires, but understand, you know, we have limitations year by year, and are patient and wait, and see the bigger picture. I think that's what Ashwaubenon's always been we like to think we're a little bit better, right? And I think that's in some of the space why we are, because I think generally the board as well, they're very open and progressive, and the staff sees that. I think I said to Rex, he's got a lot of stuff on his list. I said, this is all great, and I appreciate it, but that's a lot. Are we going to be good here? This is a lot of stuff, but we want to do it. We want to keep moving forward and push forward with new ideas and improvements and enhancements. So thank you.
Okay.
How's this building holding up? I see we've got a few more dollars in there for personnel services for maintenance of Village Hall maintenance. Keeping up with the building pretty well?
We'll let Doug answer that.
Yeah, Village Hall's in pretty good shape. If you remember, over about the past 5 or 6 years, we've had, new roof, new air conditioning system, new boiler system. It's been taken care of in bits and pieces over about the past 5, 6, 7 years. So now it's some of the service maintenance contracts on those pieces of equipment. I think in the budget for next year is the north parking lot. That'll be the last phase of the parking lot here that we'll be completing. But the building itself, good shape. If you noticed in the Village Hall maintenance budget, you probably saw down by Public Works, Engineering, and Utilities, plastic wrap for the better part of 2 months. There was a flood here that we had during the big rain in August. Was not a structural failure of the building, but if you could believe it or not, buildup of deposit from the sump pump over the past 25 years that this building's been in operation, and it filled up a section of storm lateral. And when those big rains hit, went down that storm lateral and started backing up. So you'll see a little bit of work happening before Christmas. We found where that plug is in the floor down by public safety, the entranceway. There'll be some work happening down there, and just to avoid that area come the holidays.
Thank you. As it relates to the equipment use charges, are those been increased to reflect the costs associated with new equipment now and that kind of thing? I see in public safety, it's gone to 248 from 190. A better reflection of the actual needs of equipment and the costs associated with that?
Yeah, I think public safety, for the better part of certainly last year and this proposed coming budget, have done a better job at asset replacement as it relates to squad vehicles and fleet vehicles within the department, and certainly have the ability to then take those existing assets and put them down into lower priority areas within the department, so existing squads will be retired from patrol activities and then provided to other staff within the department to then replace that much older of equipment. So they're doing a good job at getting back to a routine, more appropriate schedule of asset replacement.
It looks like that equipment replacement budget is in real good shape too, and you're continuing to make sure that it is.
Yeah, that's an area to highlight. We don't borrow to buy vehicles. I don't know how many communities can say that. We don't borrow to replace our equipment. And part of public safety up and part of what Joel said, they do have an ambulance in here and it's a large cost item. So you're taking a fully depreciated asset, now adding a depreciable asset that drove that cost up a little bit. And as a whole, that fund is doing well, and we're been replacing some high dollar equipment the last few years. Dump trucks, going to need, a new garbage recycling trucks, things like that. Those are large items. So we try to be reasonable on our depreciation schedules, realistic. It'd be nice to just say 20 years and everything, but we recognize that it might only be 8. And so that's the realistic number, not to penalize us down the road. And then we manage our budget around that, so.
Very good, thank you.
Any other,
Are we going through the department budgets now? Are we still in the general, or can I ask questions in the specific department budgets? Or does
Yeah,
it
I think
matter?
we're kind of wide open right now with,
Okay.
instead of just going page by page.
Okay.
If you have a question on any one of the general fund, so before you get to special revenue funds, that's kind of where we're
Okay,
at.
cool. So the village board administration, page 22, the contractor services, I'm assuming is for our HR services again. So obviously, those have worked out well, and we're going to continue on with the service that we have for 2022.
Correct.
I would assume.
We've had a very good working relationship with HR Consulting LLC. They've done a number of individual projects as well as just general day-to-day human resource-related functions. From a year-to-date budget standpoint, the total spend on a week-by-week basis completely aligns with the budget amount that's been identified here. So everything seems to be working very, very efficiently from that standpoint. And unless we have some other turnover with our staff, I think we will continue to propose contracting that service versus bringing it in-house at this time.
Okay.
any other questions on any of these other budgets between here and the special revenue funds?
I do want to make a comment that I think the adding of the multimedia person, communication specialist is a very high priority need, and we absolutely need to add that. And especially when you look at our strategic directives and that, the last one, to provide communication, effective communication and engagement, that this position is very needed. And keep relying on Jeremy to be doing everything. So he does a lot. Thank you, Jeremy.
Yeah, I totally agree that this position is needed, but I also think we need to look at Jeremy's position. He is going to be taking on, he's going to be supervising someone, I would assume. And I believe his wage should be looked at because he is adding a supervisory role to his position. And, if you look at the wage that we're projecting for the multimedia specialist, it's $50,000. Well, Jeremy, if I'm reading this right, is about $59,000 right now. So it's, less than $10,000 less than what he's making right now. He's going to be taking on supervision, and he is, if I read this right, he's going to be taking on higher priority items through his position now. I totally support the new position, and I think a $50,000 wage is probably good for that position, and I'm sure you guys did some comparables. But I would ask that we look at Jeremy's position and look at bumping his with the added responsibility that he is going to have with the additional position added below him.
One of our work projects for our HR consultant next year will be to do a wage and compensation study for all of our non-represented positions and put together some type of proposal or package for how we want to handle wages and compensation as it relates to step increases, performance evaluation, so on and so forth. So I think it would be an appropriate opportunity to review not only our IT network system administrator's wage, but all of our other non-represented employees as well.
Oh, I would agree, I think you should, but if we go ahead with the position, I think we should also go ahead with looking at Jeremy's and look at it, if we're going to have the HR company look at it, that's great, but then if he's getting a boost, it should go retro to the beginning of the year or when this new employee comes on.
Yeah, the other element, so when you look at the particular IT budget and the overall wage that's in there and using the simple math, it doesn't necessarily equate out because 20% of the actual position wages is allocated to the other utilities. So when you look at the general fund spend for that specific line item under IT, 20% of that is actually allocated to another fund. But we can certainly look at it.
Can you touch again on snow removal? You mentioned, are we going forward with the more snow removal on sidewalks and trailways from the conversation we had a couple months ago, was that?
So I'll kind of defer a little bit to Rex and Doug, but essentially what we're looking to do, if I recall correctly, the action by the board was to trial snow removal on a couple of trails, if I'm not mistaken, and that we would begin that at some point next calendar year. So as part of the budget process, we have dollars allocated towards wages, more or less, with the addition of another full-time public works operator, as well as the reclassification of our custodian position to a park maintenance worker position to begin that trial effort at the start of what would be the 2022-2023 snow season. So meaning budget gets approved, let's say this month, starting January 1, we won't be clearing trails or sidewalks starting in January, but we would the next snow season.
So with that trial, does that mean we would dictate what trails or sidewalks in addition that we want plowed, or would literally every trail and sidewalk in Ashwaubenon be plowed?
It would be the former of that. So you would have the opportunity to determine what trails and sidewalks are included in that trial. And Rex, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, if there was some trails that were designated?
The initial estimates that we had from a contractor included the Packerland Trail and the Ashwaubenon River Trail, Allison. There's been a lot of discussion on the Packerland Trail because it also goes across Oneida property, goes across Hobart property, of whether that's really the right one to do.
Yeah.
So bike and ped, and still to be discussed moving forward, but we're looking at either the Wabi Trail or the Sand Acres Drive Trail to replace the Packerland Trail.
Okay.
To try those out. And reason being, those are within neighborhoods where at Bike and Ped Committee discussion, potentially they would see the most usage from the neighborhood people walking on them. Especially down at the Ashwaubenon River Trail, where there's really no streets per se. There's the road into the Manso Flats apartment complex and the Bayshore condominiums, but there's no network of roads really for people to walk on. And a lot of the folks have been trying to clear it on their own with some of their own personal vehicles, which we appreciate, but may not be the best long-term solution liability-wise and maintenance-wise on that trail. So we know that one of the ones that we want to focus on is the river trail, and then either Sand Acres and or Wabi would be probably next in line.
Okay.
So Rex, the total budget amount then would be 10,000, is that correct, or am I off on that?
That's what's been assigned, Tracy. Initially, when we had talked with the board, we had gotten a quote from one of the local contractors, and our thought was to have a contractor do it.
So now you're looking in-house.
But now with the addition of an additional staff person and reclassification, it may be done in-house. So we're looking at that being done in-house now, really.
So, but the budget does include 10,000, is that correct, or am I off on that?
I believe it does.
The budget, so the original budget submission was 25,000 in a contracted service line. But then we didn't realize, hey, this is just for 2 months out of 5 roughly, so we were going to make that 10. But then we took that out and upped that reclassification position. So it is, but it's within wages for staffing.
So we're figuring the additional staff
Correct.
can handle the trial
Correct.
with the
Correct.
trails that we're looking at and be able to
And
do
that
it.
reclassification will allow that staff person in that role to be available to do that function where they may not be able to do that today based on their job duties, if you will.
Okay, thank you.
Are we okay from an equipment standpoint to cover that? You know, okay, we're adding the people, but do we have the equipment for them to be able to do it?
What it'll be a priority process. Okay, right now, the process is the streets, we take care of all the schoolyards. We get those cleared out. Then there's generally one park and rec maintenance personnel who's heading out on the sidewalks, followed behind by a public works personnel. So there's generally 2 going out on the sidewalks. And then after that's complete, that's when the trail assistance would start, would be with the other park and rec personnel who would be assigned to it, and a public works person as needed. So it's going to be, as things get done, it trickles on, it trickles on down.
If we have back-to-back snowstorms, good chance the trails aren't going to get done.
That'll be a discussion as we start getting this ramped up, is there's just going to have to be an understanding that depending on the type of storm, how quickly in between, there'll be some time
Before it gets
of wait before it'll happen, correct?
And that happens when our streets, when we get a couple of back-to-back snowstorms, they don't look as good as they did if we only had one snowstorm. So it's kind of like, you know, you can catch when you can catch it.
So then going into 2023 budget, you said originally it was 25,000, and then we scaled it back to 10,000 because we were only looking at 2 of 5-ish months. So then going into 2023, would we be going back to looking at 25,000 for this?
I think our initial thought process was we wanted to basically trial this out with the couple, 3 trails that would be identified by the board to be completed. And then at that point, you could scale the winter maintenance based on what the priorities are of the board. So that allocation of contracted wage amounts, we'd have to look at that again, because again, as described, we pulled back the contract expense, and we're going to internalize that with our existing staff.
Okay.
So it's just going to vary depending on the service level that the board desires, and whether or not we need to add additional contract service or additional staff labor towards that effort after the first year that we've implemented the process or the program.
The challenge I see is we're going to be sitting here next year at this time, and if we got to add in a budget line item for that, we still haven't done the trial. So
We were going to have that challenge either way, right?
Correct.
So, yeah.
A question I have, probably more geared for Tracy, just because I don't know the answer. Do we have a way, or does the Bike and Ped have a way of monitoring, you know, when this does go into effect, usage? Like, and not obviously like in the same way like traffic study or something, but do we get feedback? I mean, I know we would get feedback from citizens, but is there any way to see, you know, the usage of the trails once we start this, if it's, you know what I mean, being utilized?
You know, besides just seeing additional use, I know that the Fox River Trail does have trail counters. I don't know if they work during the winter months, but they do have some that they put out.
Okay.
So I think it's just a matter of, you know, keeping an eye on it and seeing how many people are out there. I know that I've had a lot of requests for the removal of snow on the trails by my neighborhood area, and I know Mary has some calls from the River Trail area. So there is a desire, I think, out there, and I think it's kind of like, you know, when you have it or when you do it, they will come kind of thing, you know? So I think it'll open up and you'll see more on it just because it's available.
Yep. And I was just curious to see if, when we're looking at budgeting and stuff, to see.
Allison, I will say for the Ashwaubenon River Trail right now, because we have some mystery people that are literally plowing it already.
Yep.
The garbage cans all winter long need to be emptied literally twice a week because of people walking their dogs. Remember how we talked about there weren't any roadway systems?
The river trail makes total sense.
Yeah,
I live over there.
Manso Flats allows pets,
Yeah.
and I think everyone in there must have a pet.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why they're using that trail so judiciously, and thoroughly. And so we have to literally go in there weekly. And so we know that one's being used.
Yes, yep, and I would agree with that one. I've walked that one in winter, and I 100% agree on that one, so. Okay, I was just curious. I just wanted a little more clarification on that. I'm good. Thank you.
I think we as a board will be keeping our eyes open on those trails, and I think staff as well. So the feedback from staff and what we see ourselves. I was going to get Tracy a lawn chair and a clicker, but
Thank you.
she rejected that idea. I don't know.
No, I'll sit out there, that's fine.
I'm good on it. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on any of the budgets?
Question on weed control. It goes back to Main Avenue, going from De Pere.
Yes.
And De Pere has done a terrible, terrible job.
I just talked to the mayor this morning.
Oh, my God.
Are they responsible for all those roundabouts?
No,
Yes.
we are, I think, responsible.
No, we are not responsible
We are-
for any of those roundabouts.
Even the far west one?
Nope.
Okay, that's what Rex
Correct.
said. Okay.
Well, back, if you remember, the village of Ashwaubenon used to extend into De Pere, where the
All these stuff.
Aldi store is. When De Pere, I don't know if annexed is the right word. I don't know if horse swap is the right word, but that's what I'm going to use. When that horse swap happened, that section of Main Avenue also went along with that transfer. So Holter Brothers, where Holter Brothers is located within the village, but then both roundabouts and everything going into De Pere is De Pere. Steve contacted me earlier this year on that roundabout and contacted De Pere, and they realized that it's their responsibility. I'd say begrudgingly, a couple days later, people were out there taking care of it.
And they
But
cleared
it is their
all the
responsibility.
ones except for the far west. That's the only one they did not get to. So then I asked Rex recently, said, is that really theirs or is ours? Or why didn't that one get done when they did all the other ones? So they are responsible for all of them.
Yeah, I talked with the De Pere mayor, James Boyd, this morning, and as we were talking on the phone, he was driving out there to look at it, and he said that he would have his public works or park and rec people out there ASAP.
Good.
So
Yeah, looks like heck.
we had gotten complaints, so.
It doesn't look like heck, it looks like hell.
Yeah,
It is, and it's been like that
ever.
forever.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
anyway, well, I'll leave it alone.
Thank you.
We're working on it.
I'm going to dial her
Get
down.
it done.
Quick question. Is there a page in here specific to medical benefits or health benefits? And if
Yeah,
so, could
towards,
you
towards the end, the internal service funds, it's the last major section where it has the dental
I didn't
health
follow it.
plans. Yep.
Got it. Thank you.
A question on transit. Do we know what we're getting from transit? I know they're doing a lot of changes at Green Bay Transit and smaller buses and routes and whatever. And
Yeah.
I know in Bellevue, there seems to be some confusion as it relates to what they're doing, how they're doing it, and if they, well, I won't go any further, but it's kind of interesting.
Yes.
Any thoughts?
So, yes. Yes, it's interesting from the aspect of a couple things. Obviously, they went through a major transit overhaul as far as their fixed route systems, and they added this component called microtransit, where they have these kind of on-demand pickup locations that ultimately replaced some of the fixed routes within our community. And then, interestingly, this past year, we get a very large refund check from transit without any real explanation as to why we received that large refund check. And then subsequently to that, we contacted the transit director, and from what I understand, all contracting communities received a larger than normal refund check because of the changes in service that they made. To be quite honest with you, I don't know that she necessarily provided a good justification as to why the value of that refund was the way it was, beyond they felt bad about the changes and how that might have impacted the community, and that they haven't fully developed a formula for how they're going to charge the contracting communities, and that that charge will ultimately be determined at some point in 2022. That will then affect the 2023 budget. So when we got the budget figures for this fiscal period, we were told to budget kind of status quo from the prior year. And that's effectively what we have done.
Very good, thank you.
Speaking on transit, how do we determine, or do they determine bus routes in the village? Because I know, with a lot of our increased, stuff that we have going on in here with apartments and commercial and all that stuff, we're looking at sidewalks and, that type of, bike commuting and stuff like that. But I think another one that is going to become a lot more important is bus. A lot of people can get to and from work with bus routes. So how is that, who determines those routes?
Interesting question. I'm going to try to defer to staff. Maybe Aaron, would you mind answering that? Probably what would be more politically correct than my answer?
Okay. I see smiles, so I get some yeah.
It's going to take me back a few years back when I worked with the county, so I'm not sure how up to date this information is. But the planning for bus routes is all done through the Green Bay Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO, which is actually housed in Brown County Planning. So they work with the transit office, which actually is Green Bay Metro, so it is a Green Bay function, to identify route changes as they see demand based upon different counts, surveys, so on and so forth. So that's where the routes are defined. Now, what the process was that they used to determine their current route system, I guess I can't speak to that, unfortunately.
So we could only hope that as we continue to develop, there's more desire for people to want to have a route to this area, and they fill out a survey and hope it gets recognized?
Yeah, and just to elaborate a little bit on the process, they did have a relatively in-depth process for this last year. They did kind of a massive overhaul on their fixed route system. They added components of this microtransit on-demand system. They had a number of public informational meetings, public input sessions, public hearings, and they had a very thorough process to gather input in that. How they developed their proposal, I think that's where we kind of question how they got to the proposal that they then presented to the general public. I suspect that it was data-driven. I hope that it was data-driven. But there were certainly significant impacts to the village of Ashwaubenon from the standpoint of the amount of fixed route service that was reduced as a result of these changed transit maps. We did pick up a number of these on-demand hubs, but we lost fixed route service as a result of that.
When I had my meeting with the transit director, and they did not have a micro transit stop at the airport. Aaron and I were at that meeting, and we asked them to put a micro transit stop at the airport. So they added that, but yeah, it's was a challenge, I think, when I looked at where they were cutting our fixed routes. But if they don't have the people riding the buses, they're very costly to operate, so.
So if a constituent were interested or wanting more routes or something, we would direct them to Green Bay Metro to voice that, who would then be able to look at
Correct.
potential new routes, that kind of stuff.
Correct.
Just good to know for the public too, that, if you do have desires for bus routes and stuff, contact either us or Green Bay Metro to voice that.
And one would argue, especially those that are involved in the transit system, that the microtransit hubs are actually highly efficient in comparison to a fixed route. If you think about a fixed route, you go to your bus stop location, you have to wait your 20 or 30 minutes or whatever that duration is for that pickup. With a microtransit, through an app or a phone call, you can actually call and schedule your pickup. Now, you have to be able to make it to that hub spot in order for that pickup. But ultimately, once you get picked up at that location, you can pretty much go to any of the other hub spots or a fixed route stop throughout their entire system. And so it's more efficient from that standpoint because it's point to point versus having to weave your way through the entire fixed route system to get to, let's say, UWGB from Ashwaubenon.
Okay, any other questions, comments, concerns about the budgets from page 26 to 96?
How about on 49? Gary, if maybe you can go through a little bit more the paid on premise paramedics, how that actually will work when I read through this with the hours you're looking at and hours per week and how many people and how that would actually work for those positions. It's kind of confusing to me.
So the paid on premise, we would keep that to 20 hours per week as the goal. The hours are going to be determined based on what we feel the need is for the time, depending on our staffing levels and how we can accommodate those throughout the week. Primarily, it's going to be during the busy times that we feel for the EMS services, whenever those are. So that's going to have to be outlined and going to be determined as we go forward with this process. And again, that's going to be dependent on the CBA agreement going forward. So the goal is to be able to use them as much as possible during the heavy call volume times. And so that's really what we're looking at right now in order to supplement our paramedic staffing.
Because when you read the information, it talks about 12 hours of coverage each day. So you're looking at them being here in at least 12 hours a day, every day.
Yeah, I mean, that's the initial thought, if we can do it, not every day, obviously, because we can't make them full-time, right? So within the reasons and keeping them out in the hours that are allotted to us for that. So, we were hoping to hire 2, so we can do that. But again, it's really going to be dependent on who we get, what their availability is, and how they're going to be able to supplement our staff doing that.
So it's a work in progress to see how you're going to fit them in and where they're going to work and the hours and all of that kind of.
Yeah, I mean, it really kind of is. I mean, we really want to make sure that we use these positions if we're able to get them in the most efficient way to supplement our staff as we can. So that's really going to be, it's really hard to kind of say for sure what that's going to be until we actually take a look at where are our highest call volumes, where can we use them the most, and how is that going to supplement our staff. Now, ideally, again, we talked about before that this would actually free up some of our road cars, and so we'd like to be able to kind of combine that with those as well. So it's really going to be, a little bit of a trial and error at first to figure out how that exactly works for us within the department, and then figuring out how that's going to, again, entail and supplement our road cars as well. So we're really going to have to figure out, I don't really want to put down specifics as much as I can, just so I don't want to pigeonhole myself and say we're only going to be using them during these times, because I think it's going to have to flow depending on how the staffing allows for us.
Okay, thank you.
Couple of things to add to that conversation. One, we would be limited to no more than 1 paid on-premise employee working at one time.
Okay.
As Brian had alluded, we try to keep the individual under 20 hours, 20 or less hours per week, certainly no more than, on average, more than 23 per week. We're ultimately trying to avoid creating a benefit eligibility condition with an employee. So if they work over 1,200 hours over the course of the year, then we're required to enroll them in WRS, and that's one of the things we're attempting to avoid. And then ultimately, that annual cost is based on the amount of hours per calendar year that we would be funding the shifts. So I think Brian had indicated on average they'd be looking around staffing about 48 hours per week in total. So again, that could be a 12-hour shift for one of those days, and then the next day might only be 3 or 4. And it's all going to be kind of dependent upon need and service demand.
Any other questions, comments on this section?
Doug, what's the street lighting budget? Does it go down at all with all the LED lights that you just put in on Holmgren, or does that not make any difference? Or does that make it more expensive?
The LED lights are slightly less expensive, and as more of them go out in the community, you're talking pennies on the dollar, so you're not going to see $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year in savings. It's where what you pay for with the poles is it's a rental, so it's the pole. What's in there is the electricity, but also the maintenance and replacement of that pole in the future. So you're paying a rental rate on that. The electrical charge is a small portion of that. So what you get back in return is a slightly less rental. So these are slightly less, but overall it's pennies on the dollar, unfortunately.
That's those blue lights, right?
Interesting thing.
One's on Cormier.
The ones that have the purple or bluish tint to them are actually defective LEDs. If you see that in the news, there was a large shipment, and this is throughout the United States, on streetlights, and the ones that are a bluish or a purplish hue will be getting replaced over the course of the next few months by WPS because those are defective LEDs. They're
Thank
supposed to
God,
have the
'cause
bright
those
white
things
color.
are not good.
Yeah.
I've driven Cormier a couple times, and there's a block by J.C. Penney's there, and it's just, you can't see anything.
Correct.
Especially when Walgreens shuts down at night and turns off their parking lot lights. Glad to know those will be replaced.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, you'll be seeing those. They've got a large replacement program that's going to be happening because of that.
Okay.
I'm glad you brought that up, Tracy. I don't think people realize that we have to budget $450,000 for street lighting. So that's a huge piece of the budget.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
One other quick question on the field operator, on the new position. Are we budgeting any money from TDS? Because it looks like some of their role will be to work with the TDS. Are we doing any, because they had said they were going to pay for our additional costs for working with them on that contract, so do we budget any revenue coming in from TDS to offset that?
To be quite honest with you, that portion of the person is a wild card at this point. We're just starting to have the meetings with TDS on what is going to be required. More so what this position is going to be assisting with. If you remember a few years back, there were 2 positions funded out of the stormwater utility. And to be quite honest with you, the workload isn't allowing for that stormwater work to be happening, the stormwater maintenance. And that's going to be a good portion of that person's work. Transferring then as the subdivision takes hold in Island Ridge Estates, that'll probably be the second thing that'll be happening because those routes will be getting larger. And then as we determine just what happens with TDS, I think a good majority of that is going to end up being contracted out work that they're going to fund. So is there revenue coming in from them? Yes, it's probably going to go right to some type of service to take care of that. That being said, the question marks are in the locating, maybe some permit inspection assistance, things of that nature. I don't know if that position will be able to assist with it. It's a question mark at this point.
Yeah, to answer your question, no revenue was added in any form just because of what Doug said. It's just too many unknowns
Okay.
at this point and the timing of when it's going to happen. So, but that position would be potentially available if we felt there was a need to do, but based on Doug's priorities, it's minimal at best. So.
Any other questions, comments, concerns?
If not, then what we'll do is we'll save the approval at the end, and we'll just start with the special revenue funds section on page 97. So with special revenue funds, again, most of these, they're deemed special revenue because they have some alternative form of revenue coming in. So park development, for example, has park impact fees. And then there's a special use of those funds. We have donation, we have a canine program, DARE, Citizens Academy, cadets. It's all public safety side programs, if you will, that they used to have one single, like a supply line in the budget, but we wanted to pull them out because we recognize that a lot of those were funded in different capacities through donations. The employee retirement fund is within this section as well, and what that is for is employees build up accrual balances and they retire. There are payouts that they are owed, and so we have this fund separated so that we keep those away from operational budgets as well. The one add in here this year, which we may want to have some discussion on, are the ARPA funds. So that has its own designated fund. We did receive $898,000 this year. We will get another payment, that's half, we'll get another payment. All of those funds are required to be spent by December 31st, 2024. So as Joel alluded to, and when we started this meeting, a lot of the capital projects that were in the budget, and kind of the one-time, if you will, were moved or shifted over into this fund. They're all listed in here on if we get into page 109, they include some park projects, some public safety projects, the parking lot that Doug mentioned, and to a lot of lake projects, the maintenance building, and the technology enhancements in here. So there's a lot of projects out there. I think we should view those as there's still some work to be done, I think, on the numbers in some of those areas, obviously to get better quotes for the maintenance building, for example, or the technology enhancements, but it's an area where we don't have to feel like if we don't spend it next year, those funds would still roll over and those projects would continue to be on that list. We certainly will have more. It's a good problem to have, I guess, to spend another similar portion of money. We have about 1.8 total to spend. So I think we'll probably bring those more here, or they'll be discussed, maybe updates where we're at with ARPA funding, the different project lists. But that's the new one added in here, and that will get audited specifically because of the nature of those federal funds coming in.
I think you did a good job with the projects you've identified for those ARPA funds. Like I said, they're long-term significant costs that will benefit the community for many years. Don't have a problem with any of those. On employee retirement, though, is there a need for us to budget more dollars in that particular fund as we go forward? Any of your thoughts on that, guys?
Yeah, I think, it always comes up, and typically what the village has done in the past is anytime we will go through the end of the year, and when we have a surplus, meaning that our revenues are exceeding our expenditures at the end of the year, we've typically transferred funds into this. That's the alternative to just budgeting.
Okay.
The problem with budgeting is sometimes we don't really know who's going to retire, and sometimes we think we know, and then that doesn't happen, and then you've put money there and you don't have it. And I would anticipate, potentially this year in December we'll come to the board if there's any surplus, and that would probably be the recommendation, because those retirements, they add up, but we typically find ways to fund this, usually through that process.
Thanks for refreshing my memory on that.
Yeah.
That's always one of my big sticklers whenever we have excess at the end of the year, is putting it in employee retirement.
So for park impact fees, or I guess park development is called, the projects that are in there, Rex, are the electronic fitness station, the Fort Howard splash pad, and then Pioneer gravel pad. Those are the three that will come out of park impact fees next year?
Correct. As long as we can get to all of them.
Yeah.
And I should say this, Tracy, there's also, let me take a step back, there's also some funding earmarked potentially still for the Main Avenue Trail, West Main, and then also the bridge project.
As long as we're talking about that, how is that project coming along? It seems to be moving slowly.
Yes.
Maybe.
And yes. They are still moving. Which one are we talking about, West Main or the bridge right now? Which one do you want to go first?
Both.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's all right. So due to some fiber optic lines that were not marked or mismarked, however you want to talk about it, on the initial plan, which now finally have we found an owner for. That has set the project back time-wise, where we probably will not be able to actually pave the trail this year. We're still looking at being able to install the box culvert and hopefully the retaining wall this year. But the actual paving, because of the timing of when the asphalt plants shut down due to the cold weather, better to do that next year than to do it on frozen ground.
So there were some technical difficulties.
Many technical difficulties on that one. On the Ashwaubenon River Trail Bridge project, we've got the results back from the boring where the bedrock is. They are doing calculations right now on the pressure that the ice shoves coming down the river, what that would put on the bridge. We are working with the developer to finish up some final grading of where the clubhouse and one of the buildings are going to be. That's going to determine some different grading plans for the landing of the bridge, which will all determine what the height of the bridge is and so on and so forth. So there's a few fine details that are being worked out right now, but the next step, once those calculations are done, would be the actual final design of the bridge, which we would then be able to turn into the DNR.
Thank you.
So someone enlighten me on the DARE program. Does Ashwaubenon have a DARE program, or is it part of the city or county or what?
We have a DARE program within the agency, and we have DARE instructors. Actually, one of our SROs is a DARE instructor.
You have your own chapter? Okay. Or is it just?
It's not a chapter. It's just, we're part of the program, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Another question on the page 109, the Knox box key secure units. Is that something that shouldn't the business do that, or is that part what happens in our vehicles or something, or what?
Yeah, so the Knox box units actually for our officers, they're in the back of the squads. So they're secured back there, and they're able, that's what they use in order to be able to get into the Knox boxes on the businesses. So we have to have a secure system in order to keep that accountability.
Well, it's not on the business, it's on our vehicle.
They're on our vehicles, yep.
Thank you.
Chief, one other quick question, because I was just looking at the canine. I believe earlier this year, we approved the therapy dog at the schools. Just wondering, I forget where we're at with that. Oh, it looks like I maybe touched something I shouldn't have, but just curious on where that's at and if it's been successful.
Yeah, we do have the therapy dog in the schools. One of our SROs, Jeff Everett, is the handler of that dog. It has been successful in the schools. They're continuing with that program. That's a separate fund. It's not part of the canine fund. So, yeah.
I just saw that and it made me think of that, and
Yep.
I wanted to ask before I left. So that's all. I was just curious. Thank you.
Very good.
Yeah, some feedback that I've received on that, Allison, is there have been instances where there's been students that are kind of, have some anxiety. And when that dog gets involved in there, it's like the students just totally react differently. And just kind of, so it sounds like it's a great tool.
I know the schools really enjoy the dog being there, and it really has been helpful in certain circumstances.
Yeah, and some students look for that dog almost every day.
That's awesome.
yeah.
Thank you. Like I said, I was just curious because I saw dogs. So thanks.
I have two questions on some of the ARPA projects. For Doug, first, the heavy-duty truck diagnostic scanner. My only question on that is, it looks like that work has been outsourced for many years, or maybe just recently. Do we have the staff to be able to do that? Do we have enough staff that they can handle that, and we can use that piece of equipment? And
Correct. What this is with some of the newer trucks, we have scanners for our older vehicles. This would be for our newer vehicles, and our mechanics would then be able to do that diagnostic right at that point in time instead of having to send it over to be done.
Okay. And then this may be a funny question, but the garage jack stand replacement, is that for one, when you have 4 stands that are cracked and shouldn't be used anymore, or is that for 4 new ones to replace those cracked ones? that shouldn't be used?
We've already thrown away the old ones.
Oh, good.
We have a little bit of a tendency to spit and duct tape things, and the guys are fantastic with it, but some of those things just need to go away. And so Lee made them go away, and we put them in the budget.
Okay, so this would replace 4 then, the 5,500?
Yes,
Or-
they
okay.
replaced the 4 that have gone in, and I think may have gone in the steel bin for money.
Good, good. And then Gary, just a question on the anti-vehicle barriers. Not Gary, I'm sorry, Brian. Dang it. Brian, for the anti-vehicle barriers, I'm thinking of Gary with Chorick.
Yeah.
I know, it's terrible. I do that with him all the time. It's terrible. Brian, the anti-vehicle barriers, how many new ones are we getting? And are those going to be built in-house like the other ones that we saw when we put out, when I went on the walk around with you?
You mean the metal barriers that we're
Yes.
talking about?
Yes, the ones that they put out at Holmgren, looks like, oh, maybe Doug knows them, I'm sorry.
Yes, that'd be coming through Public Works. There'd be 12 of them that we'd be getting, and a trailer that they are hauled on. Lee made the original ones.
That's what I thought you did.
These will be getting purchased, not made.
Okay. So where are these going to be used that we need the 12 more?
There is some closures that have started this year on Holmgren Way. So we're splitting some of the existing ones between there and Armed Forces Drive. There are a few more that are needed up on Ridge Road and in the Titletown area. So they'll probably be deployed in that area.
Thanks. Sorry, Brian.
Any more questions about the special revenue funds? Okay,
So the next section is debt service. This is really our obligations. It's really somewhat non-negotiable, if you will. I do have a list of all of it that's out there. We didn't have any debt service this year, and we'll likely to have something next year as some projects are coming through, some TIF projects, but we will bring that to the board at that time. So this just lists out our obligations for next year, and I've got a graph in here that shows over the next 5 years some of our obligations. We do have one large TID 5 debt coming due in 2023. It's one of our NANs. That will get refinanced, so that's not going to be a problem for us in the budget, from a budget perspective.
When did we approve TIF 5?
2015, 2016?
2013, I think, or 5. Yeah, somewhere in there, 14, 15.
Thank you.
So then the next section is the capital projects funds. These are kind of non-operational, even though some of them kind of are. What we did is to, again, help the general fund be more of a level, steady budget. We set up different capital project funds for different areas within the village. Street construction, we've actually increased that 25,000. We still are a little bit behind, I think, where Doug would ultimately like to be, but we're constantly trying to get back to that level. The village building fund, we moved out the parking lot into ARPA funds, but we want to continue to maintain the $25,000 allocation that we receive every year, so that fund can continue to grow for future needs. Park and recreation and public safety, the items that we left in there, like for public safety, there's an allocation of property taxes left in there. That's to cover the ongoing replacement items. So Chief has done a great job with, leveling out those replacements. So it's tasers, fire hose, fire gear, you name it, they're all listed in here. That's we want to have that to be a nice steady replacement schedule over time. So instead of replacing every fire hose in 1 year, we've flattened that out over 5-6 years. and did that with a lot of the different equipment needs. So that's why there's still a levy presence in there and still a little bit of fund drawing out of there. The items that we put into ARPA were the body cameras, some of these bigger one-time costs right now. And same with park and recreation.
Greg, quick question. So with the new body cameras, that's replacing stuff like tasers, and that was all kind of in that. So over time, will we see this area of public safety like go down, I guess, compared to like, because it won't be as much to replace things like tasers because it's part of the body camera system, is that correct?
I wouldn't say that we'd see it go down. I think there's those body cameras, those Axon body cameras are going to be a replacement item down the road, so that'll get worked into the schedule as well. Tasers specifically, I'm not sure. That might just be a wash. I'd leave that up to the chief to explain the tasers. But all the other equipment in there, those are items that aren't going to go away. So, you know, they have radar replacements, AEDs, turnout gear, bulletproof vests, fire helmets, the mobile radios that are in the vehicles. All those things would continue over time.
Chief, so maybe not, or Chief and Greg, so maybe not specifically on tasers and things like to that level, but if we're going to be doing the body camera system and it's going to be this rollout, you know, that an initial upfront cost, how will we get on a schedule to replace those and not have a huge cost when all of a sudden all 50 are ready to be upgraded? Is there a way that you can phase in?
I have the answer for you.
Awesome.
So with the contract with Axon, it includes the body cameras, and includes tasers, includes the fleet cameras. Those systems are automatically upgraded every 18 months. So that's rolled into the contract. So I should say once every 5 years, there's an upgrade. So in 18 months or so, we're going to get an upgrade to the new system, the new body cameras, new fleet cameras. If the tasers, they just got an upgrade, so it's going to be well for them. They're going to automatically be upgraded as part of that contract, so we're not going to see that expense. We're going to see the expense come 5 years down the road when we have to renew the contract. Then we're going to have that same type of cycle that goes through the Axon contract as well. Really, the only thing that we're doing right now is we're buying taser cartridges for training and use. That's really the only expense that we're getting outside of that contract as we speak.
Okay, so we'll see the contract renewal every 5 years more so versus equipment renewal.
Correct. It'll all be part of that.
Okay, thank you.
And Allison, at present, too, Axon, as part of this initial contract, they allowed for basically a payment plan over a period of years. So some of that value was upfront because of the donation from the Packer organization, but over time that diminishes, and so that kind of helps kind of balance that expenditure so you don't have that large upfront expenditure for each term.
Perfect, thank you.
And briefly, want to touch base on the 3 TIF districts that are in here and how we do the budgeting for those. The revenue side are pretty good revenues. That's the increment coming in, and there's some intergovernmental revenues that come in as well in those areas. So those are all projections that would be accurate. The projects, the expenditures listed here are items that we meet internally a couple times a year and go through, you know, what we're anticipating as projects. And if there's any borrowing needs at this point, we would, and potentially in TIF 5. But those are projects that are out there that have been discussed in the past, sidewalks, different roadway improvements and things like that. The transfer out is the debt service. So the TIFs bring in their revenue, and then what they do is they transfer their share of debt over to a debt service fund. So that's just a transfer of dollars to cover the debt service payments. And then any formally or priorly agreed to TIF incentives are listed in here as well. One thing I'd like to note with TID 3 is if you look, you know, that fund balance is starting to grow. It was but a couple years ago that was negative, and so it's been working itself through, and we'd anticipate as the Packers finish up especially that number will grow better. TID 4, the plan right now is to close TID 4. We'll have more, we'll come to the board on that. The goal is to finalize up the costs with the trail projects that's out there and then close that district in 2022. And then TID 5 is, obviously, there's a lot going on there. that valuation is hurting. It looks bad, but I think we feel confident with some of the more recent developments that have been going in, that number will turn around over the next couple of years quickly. And that's the goal. So kudos to Aaron for all the hard work he does to help these districts grow. So it pays off in the end.
Any questions on those funds? Okay. Enterprise funds.
So the utility funds as a whole are fairly, water, sewer, especially from a cost perspective, fairly status quo. Some of the areas are out of our area of control, such as the Met, we buy our water and pay for our sewer services, but typically there's not huge increases there. The big thing is the water and sewer utilities are going through rate reviews this time. The sewer, I believe we should be able to implement that rate increase for the start of the year. The water utility at this point, maybe the third quarter. So Doug and I are in the middle of that process and trying to finalize back and forth with the PSC right now with getting them all the final information. But once they go through that review process, there is, some of the revenues are adjusted for those anticipated increases. And then their project lists in these, and I'll obviously let Doug and Steve here to talk any questions you have, but many of their projects are kind of the status quo maintenance type things, or I know Steve does a lot of work with the ponds and all the requirements there, so I guess I'd leave it up to them to answer any questions you'd have.
Just to jump in a little bit on the sewer utility end of things, like Greg mentioned, that'll be a first quarter rate increase. That's a single digit increase. I want to say it's 6 to 8%. So it's a pretty minor increase on that end. On the water utility end, we've discussed that previously at Village Board. That's a double digit increase. We've been working with the PSC on it. We've been fortunate in that we've had the same rate for a number of years. The negative to that is when you go in for a rate increase, they now use that as an opportunity to catch up from all these years. So they have a lot of questions, just data questions they're looking to for us to answer. Then with that, they can finish their rate projections and then have the discussion with us on a phase-in approach of the rates. They are still interested in discussing that process with us. Our financial position is such that they said we can't have that discussion, so we're very optimistic that would be the case. Again, that would be a phased-in approach. It would happen, one increase would happen later in 2022 and then one in 2023, so it bites it off in chunks instead of in one fell swoop.
It looks like with the rate increases that you guys are proactively seeking that will offset the operating income losses that we've seen, and that's good planning from your perspective. Question for you, Doug. Do we still have a lot of that asbestos concrete pipe in the ground here in Ashwaubenon?
For the water main, I want to say we're at about 53%, I think, that we still have in the ground. The pipe is an excellent pipe structurally, as long as it isn't dug around. As soon as you dig around it, it's pretty bad structurally. But when I first started here, I think we were in the mid-60s in terms of percentage of it in our system, and we're slowly working our way out of it. When we start our capital improvement program in the utilities, which is about 2027 roughly, those will be the areas that are targeted first, because that'll be some of our oldest main.
So when you have a major street reconstruction project, you'll take that pipe out and put in the PVC pipe now?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any questions on enterprise funds?
If not, the last section goes through the dental plan, health insurance plan, equipment replacement plan. Again, these are internal service funds, which means that they are the revenues come from, there's a charge back to each of the departments based on, in this health and dental based on the employees, and then the equipment based on the department of that equipment, and the annual depreciation. So that's how they're funded. They're funded internally. So the advantage to that for us is we don't have to live with a large insurance company rate increases, for example, we have a little more flexibility internally to set our rates and plan coverages. Overall, the dental insurance plan is really well funded. We're not anticipating any increases there. It's actually quite a high balance, but that one's fine. Health insurance, right now, the plan is to keep everything status quo on the year. We review it year by year and how the plan performs, and just felt like that with everything else going on, that was maybe the better option to keep it status quo. Still looking this year to kind of end the year flat, and so that would support that theory as well. And then the equipment replacement fund, all the pieces of equipment listed there are replacing, as we discussed earlier a little bit with public safety, but each department does a good job of going through and picking the pieces of equipment that are up and due. We have a kind of a 5-year plan out there where people are reviewing, and so nothing's really a big surprise. And we do look at that so that if we push off a dump truck, we're not going to hurt ourselves next year or the year after. We try to strategically place these to help each department, but then also keep our budget in line.
Chief, I do have one question for you. On the top of page 160, we're replacing a vehicle, car 4, and I don't know if this was a typo, but it says existing vehicle age is 4 and its useful life is 5. Why are we replacing it a year early?
Well, I think that might be a typo on Greg's part.
Yeah, that's probably on me. It's a
Oh,
typo.
okay, typo,
Yeah.
okay, that's what I figured, but,
Can I use it's a large spreadsheet as an excuse?
well, I can't
Yes.
even imagine all those numbers, Greg, so.
Your reserves in dental insurance and the equipment replacement are admirable. Those are good numbers. Any thought on health insurance, whether or not that at some point in time might need to be bumped up at all or not?
I think based on this last year, it is certainly tight for 2022. I would suspect come 2023 that we will look towards a premium increase, because whatever cushion we had, it's pretty much been diminished over the last 2 years. So I think there definitely will need to be a more worthwhile discussion on premium increases and the possibility of, how that burden is passed on, and if that means higher premium contributions from the employees or just simply the village is taking on those additional costs.
Yeah, and I'm not advocating that, in any fashion or format. Usually the rule of thumb was $500,000 to $1 million, somewhere in that range you'd want to be. And I think that this health insurance program is a good program relative to not only recruiting employees, but also retaining them, more importantly. So with that, just a thought.
And we agree, and I think that was one of the reasons, really kind of the main reason why we were proposing to keep the premium levels flat from last year to this year, primarily because of that concern.
Very good, thank you.
So you're not making any changes to the health insurance plan at all either? You're staying consistent with what you've had in the past?
So if there are no other questions, typically what the board would do is specifically approve the general fund budget expenditures that are listed at $16,742,330, and then also approve the other funds as presented.
Unless there's any other questions, I'd make that motion. I think it's, like I said before, you guys did a great job, and that doesn't mean there won't be some trials and tribulations as we go forward, but you guys are managing it and managing it well. So thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the general fund expenditures for $16,742,330. Any other discussion, comments, concerns? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Again, thank you, staff, did an awesome job.
This particular item will come back to the village board on the 23rd. So there'll be a public hearing on the budget and then a formal adoption by the village board. So between now and then, there still could be some modifications to the budget.
Really quick before we adjourn, I just want to say the department heads, thank you guys all for your help that you guys helped me with while I served, because 9 times out of 10, I reached out to all of you to help answer questions, so I do appreciate that. And thank you all. This is my last in-person meeting, so it's been fun, and I'm sure I'll see you around, and who knows, maybe one day I'll be back, but thank you all, so.
Thank you, Allison,
Allison.
for all your years you gave to the village. Okay, so now I need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to
Move
adjourn.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. We're done.
I'll keep the trash on you with the
This conference is no longer being recorded.
good guy.
Well, the best part was I just
At least.
Yeah.
They were marathons years ago. When Mike
The nuts and bolts.